Weird body shape, wrong balance, heavy weight, unusable tuners and unstable intonation, poor sounding pickups with horrible rings, bizarre construction, goofy vibrato tailpiece, uncomfortable position of a switch and knobs. That's how a Gibson Firebird is described by its detractors. But let's grant these guitars the benefit of doubt, so we can make our own judgment. I recently had the chance to test here in my studio an original vintage Gibson Firebird III from 1964 and a similar model from 1965. It's the perfect occasion to talk about the short-lived original Firebird guitars and Thunderbird basses produced by Gibson in Kalamazoo, Michigan between October 1963 and May 1965. The so-called reverse models. We are delving into their captivating story and examining their unique features, and of course I will share with you my personal impressions. It took quite some work to make a comprehensive video including information which has been pretty hard to find, so here is a special double-length episode, all for you. If you love vintage and vintage-inspired guitar gear, subscribe to Bob's Stone Review, the channel with cherry sunburst frame, always based on documented first-hand information and serious original content. Now let's dive into the fascinating history of the Gibson Firebird. In late 1960, the original Les Paul line, as introduced in the previous decade, was discontinued. The whole line underwent a radical restyling process. It was given the shape with pointy horns that a few years later would be rebaptized SG model. The consultation and royalty agreement between the Gibson Company and the guitar player Les Paul gradually came to an end for both personal and legal matters. The Fender Electric Instrument Company, in about 15 years of activity, had reached major brand status and had now conquered a significant part of the market of electric solid body guitars. In this scenario, Gibson needed a brand new line of solid bodies to keep up with the Californian competitors. Heading towards an age of renewal, this new model line had to sport modernist design and innovative features to appeal to a new generation of players. Actually, Gibson was not new to the concept of modernistic design. In 1958, the president Theodore Ted McCarthy had tried already to refresh the traditional Gibson catalog with a radically innovative line of guitars. McCarthy's team had designed 3 futuristic models made of limba, an African wood similar to mahogany, known in the USA with the commercial name of Korina. These models were the arrow-shaped Flying V, the Explorer, shaped like a lightning bolt, and the Modern, which never went beyond the prototype stage. These guitars were ahead of their time and were not taken seriously. Dealers and musicians considered them as funny sideshow attractions. By 1959, only 22 Explorers and 98 Flying Vs were shipped. while the few prototypes of the modern even vanished without a trace. These three models were all reintroduced over the following years. So, in 1962, Ted McCarthy wanted to launch an innovative line of guitars, but keeping in mind the failure of the Korina Trio from 4 years before, this time he wanted something less radical in design. McCarthy bumped into the ideal person to entrust with this task, Ray Dietrich. Raymond Dietrich was a top-notch car designer and coach builder, renowned for the clean and distinctive styling of his automobile design. Born in 1894, he had been professionally active from 1914 through the 1950s. In 1920, at the age of 26, he already had enough experience to found his own company. With the setback of the Great Depression of the 1930s, Dietrich closed up his independent coach-building shop. He became the first head designer for Chrysler until 1938. When World War II broke out, Dietrich ended up working on war production at the Checker Motor Corporation, based in Kalamazoo, Michigan. After the war, Checker Motors resumed their production of taxi cabs. Dietrich designed the body of the groundbreaking taxi model Checker A2. At the height of his career, Dietrich restarted his coach-building business as a freelancer. He officially settled into retirement in 1960 at the age of 66. He remained in Kalamazoo, which, by coincidence, at the time was also home of the headquarters of the Gibson Company. In October 1962, Dietrich held a local talk on automobile design where he was approached by Ted McCarthy. Finally, McCarthy persuaded Dietrich to come out of retirement. He would collaborate with Gibson to create a new solid-body electric guitar with an innovative concept of design and construction. Dietrich was probably attracted by the challenge to cope with something quite new for him. Obviously, Dietrich and McCarthy had a technical briefing in which they discussed the technical details of the project. I find it reasonable to assume that Dietrich was shown the Korina Trio designs and some models made by the main competitors, the Fender Jazzmasters in particular. Anyway, McCarthy made a point of developing original designs. He proudly declared, "We never wanted our guitar to look like a Fender copy. One thing the Gibson would never do, at least while I was there, was copy anybody else." 9 days later, Dietrich submitted a portfolio of 8 different original designs with futuristic shapes. Reportedly, the Gibson sales department approved for production the last design of the series. As promised, Dietrich's design departed significantly from the concept of the classic solid bodies of the previous decade. The result recalls more closely the modernistic Korina models of 1958. In particular, the new body shape could be described as a rounded-off, softer version of the Explorer. The design evolved in an entirely new line of instruments. They would be named Firebird guitars with the companion Thunderbird bass models. The name Firebird refers to the phoenix, the mythological bird who is reborn rising from his own ashes. For this reason, someone mentions that this name was suggested by Ted McCarthy as a wish of rebirth for Gibson, which incidentally was not dead. Other sources bring up that the names were borrowed by Dietrich from the automotive industry, which seems to make more sense. Actually, no one seems to remember that Gretsch was already producing since 1955 a guitar named Jet Firebird, used by Bo Diddley. Also Bo Diddley, according to George Groan, designed two similar but distinct custom models, the Jupiter and the Thunderbird. These modernistic guitars were built specifically for him by Gretsch in 1961. That's why, my personal opinion, is that the good friendship between Ted McCarthy and Fred Gretsch accounts to the choice of the Firebird and Thunderbird names. In any case, Dietrich also designed the cool ornamental Firebird and Thunderbird logos silk-screened on the pick guards. Gibson introduced the new line of instruments in the spring of 1963, although they didn't arrive in the music shops until October. The Firebird guitar line was composed of 4 models, each aiming to different market segments. They were assigned the odd Roman numerals 1st, 3rd, 5th and 7th. The even numerals 2nd and 4th were assigned to the 2 Thunderbird base models. In essence, the Firebirds followed the same 4-model pattern used in the Les Paul and SG lines, with the Junior, Special, Standard and Custom versions. There was a difference though. The entry-level Les Paul or SG models featured the old-school P90 pickup, while the top-shelf Standard and Custom were distinguished by the more priced humbucker. More democratically, the 4 Firebird models all mounted the same type of pickup, a new version of the mini humbuckers used in some Epiphone guitars. The entry-level Firebird First, corresponding to a Junior, had one mini humbucker pickup, compensated wraparound bridge tailpiece and unbound neck with rosewood fingerboard and dot markers. It came with a price tag of $189.50. The Firebird III was priced at $249.50. It had specifications similar to an SG Special from the same era. It had 2 pickups with 3-way selector switch, neck binding, and the short Maestro Vibrola with basic spoon handle arm. The upper line Firebird Fifth was priced at $325. It boasted trapezoid inlays and pneumatic bridge like an SG standard. The Vibrola had a refined vibrato arm with plastic handle and the long nickel-plated cover with engraved lyre decoration. The top-of-the-line Firebird 7th had 3 pickups, bound ebony fingerboard, with block and lace, first fret included, and gold-plated hardware. These specifications, similar to those on the SG Custom, commanded a price of $445. The prices did not include the case, which was offered for $46. The 2 Thunderbird base models also had newly designed humbuckers. They were the first basses produced by Gibson with a 34-inch full-length scale like the Fender Precision and Jazz bass. The Thunderbird II had 1 pickup and came with a price of $290. The Thunderbird IV had 2 pickups and came with a price tag of $370. There was no Thunderbird 6th bass as a companion to the Firebird 7th guitar, maybe to avoid the confusion with the Fender Bass 6th, released a couple of years before. Fender had successfully adopted DuPont Duco custom color finishes, which they borrowed from the automotive world. To keep up with the competition, Gibson followed suit. In fact, an important part of the promotional campaign for the Firebird were custom colors. The standard finish was clear sunburst, but 10 different custom color options were offered for an extra $15. As I mentioned, I was lucky to come across this beautiful vintage 1964 Firebird III in near mint conditions. It came from Rumble Seed Music in Tennessee. The mahogany center block is highly figured, showing a unique grain pattern that earned this particular Firebird the nickname of Fishbone. This valuable instrument now belongs to my good friend Viktor Nemeth from Budapest, who owns a prestigious collection. The mid-level Firebird III was the most popular version of the four. The bridge tailpiece combination with compensated saddles is nicknamed stair-step tailpiece. Besides cosmetics, this is the only substantial difference with the Firebird V, which has the classic ABR1 bridge instead. The Firebird guitars boast several elements of innovation. The headstock is reminiscent of a mirrored version of Fender design. It has 6 in-a-line tuners, with the high E tuning key first in line and the low E string tuner farthest from the nut. Also, the asymmetric body shape has a pronounced horn on the treble cutaway that protrudes beyond the upper bout on the bass side, which is the opposite of a Jazzmaster or Stratocaster. This backwards look earned the original Firebirds the nickname of reverse models. Dietrich and McCarthy, to distance themselves from the signature Fender headstock look, made the unusual decision to adopt banjo-type tuners. The tuning keys were perpendicularly mounted and remained hidden behind the headstock for a stylish clean line. The tuners have technically optimum position. They allow a straight string alignment from the nut slot to the tuner to the benefit of tuning stability. The pronounced 17 degrees inclination of the headstock eliminates the need of any string retainer. It is worth noting that those Gibson tuning machines have conventional guitar gear ratio of 12:1. Traditional planetary banjo tuning gears usually have a 4:1 ratio, which would not be really usable on a guitar, especially with a long scale. Although Firebird tuners are not popular among players, I love them. I think they're elegant, fast, reliable, and comfortable. But the most distinctive feature of the reverse Firebirds is the neck-through-body construction. Rickenbacker had used this construction technique since the mid-1950s with the tulip-style combo solid body guitars and the 4000 bass. Gibson relaunched this type of construction using a sophisticated method. The necks of the Firebird and Thunderbird are composed of 9 strips of alternating mahogany and maple boards, laminated together for optimal strength and stability. This laminated set of long boards runs all the way to the bottom base of the guitar. Asymmetrical mahogany wings are then glued on each side of the center core section, which also serves as a mounting base for hardware and pickups. In simple terms, the neck extended all the way through the guitar as one continuous block of wood from the headstock to the bottom strap button. The Firebird design appears surprisingly up-to-date even today. Dietrich gave the instrument a lively three-dimensional feel. The center neck-through structure is slightly thicker than the wings. It forms 2 little steps or character lines, as seen in car designs. The body forms an ergonomical angle with the neck. Also, a thinner ledge surrounds the headstock, hence nicknamed sculptured headstock. The mini humbuckers adopted on the Firebird were also newly designed. Standard Epiphone mini humbuckers, later also adopted on the Les Paul Deluxe, have a similar structure to the classic PAF pickups. The Firebird version is the same size but has a completely different design, with the instantly recognizable feature of having no adjustable pole pieces. Internally, they have dual-bar Alnico 5th magnets, with the 2 coils or windings directly surrounding the magnets. They have higher output and sound more full-bodied than traditional mini humbuckers. Notably, modern stock reissue mini humbuckers are significantly different in materials, construction and sound from their regarded predecessors. There are 3 more particular details on the original run of Firebirds. The body presents 3 strap buttons, so you can choose from 2 strap buttons on the left, one on the neck heel and one on the edge of the bout for optimal balance and strap length. The 4-knob control layout is different than standard. The volume controls are both on top, while the tone knobs are on the lower row. In a certain perspective, it makes more sense, as the layout of the controls corresponds to the position of the pickups. Also, the control cavity presents silver shielding paint. When approaching a Firebird, bear in mind what we learned in BTR number 55. Any guitar needs a little adaptation time or effort to fully connect. Playing a Firebird, it's not like playing a Les Paul or a Strat. You have to embrace its own particular construction philosophy. The Firebird has a slightly longer scale than a Les Paul, and it's 5 inches or 10 centimeters longer, so you may need to adapt to different ergonomics, different position of tuners, knobs, selector switch, and so on. Its unique combination of construction technique and features gives the old Firebirds a distinct tone and playing experience. Vintage Firebirds have their own voicing, in particular they boast incredible punch and clarity from the neck pickup, which also translates in a great treble performance with the selector switch in central position. Also, the pickups are very effects-friendly, while the neck-through construction grants unrivaled sustain. Unfortunately, by 1965, the Firebird had not met the sales expectations. In 1964, Gibson sold less than 2,500 Firebirds, compared to the near 7,500 SG models. Between 1963 and mid-1965 were shipped in total less than 1,000 units of the fifth and only about 300 units of the seventh. The reverse models were made with high-quality materials through a long and sophisticated manufacturing process. This resulted in high retail prices, especially considering that the main competitors used quickly assembled bolt-on necks. Consequently, in the summer of 1965, Gibson decided to discontinue the original reverse design. The entire Firebird and Thunderbird lines underwent a substantial restyling intended to cut the production costs and therefore reduce their retail prices. Some sources also bring up that Fender threatened a lawsuit. They claimed exclusive rights over the asymmetric body shape, known as offset body design, in particular reference to their 1958 Jazzmaster and 1960 Jaguar patents. This legal dispute never had a follow-up. I believe it didn't really play a part in the decision of restyling the Firebirds. In fact, the new design paradoxically resembles even more closely a Fender guitar. The glorious McCarthy era was approaching the end. While the reverse models required a complex construction technique, the new version of the Firebird was designed for a streamlined manufacturing process and a more conventional appearance. This effectively allowed to lower the retail prices. The main changes were a regular set neck in place of the neck-through assembly, a flat body with no character lines, and a flat, non-sculptured or beveled headstock with no ledge. The headstock now has a conventional Stratocaster orientation. Ordinary 16-line Cluson tuners replace the banjo-style tuners with the bass E-string key first in line close to the nut. In the new body design, the bass bout protrudes beyond the treble horn in a familiar fashion. Therefore, the Firebirds and Thunderbird lines of this second generation are commonly known as non-reverse models. All models have simple dot markers and were factory rerouted for a large cavity for 3 pickups known as bathtub root. The pickups were mounted onto the plastic of a large pickguard, which hides the surplus routing. This means that the 4 versions of the non-reverse Firebirds, from the 1st to the 7th, are all based on the same bare body and neck assemblies. Now the 1st and the 3rd mounted P90 pickups, while the mini humbuckers remained on the 5th and 7th. The non-reverse Firebird and Thunderbird line was also phased out in 1969. But the world is never black or white. There's always a gray zone in the between. Beyond the metaphors, between reverse and non-reverse models during the summer of 1965, quite a few transitional instruments were produced, which presented an overlap of features. Some amazing guitars came out of this gray area. For example, some reverse Firebirds have soap bar pickups in place of the mini humbuckers, to the delight of P90's fans. Also, out of this gray zone comes the second wonderful Firebird III I've been lucky to have here. It is a reverse model under any aspect, except that it has a non-reverse headstock. It has the bass E tuner closest to the nut, but still presents the ledge. It's a very rare mirrored version of the original sculptured headstock with banjo tuners. This rare bird has also flown to my friend Victor's collection. I don't hesitate to define this Firebird one of the greatest instruments I was lucky to come across. It is featherweight, it has breathtaking mojo and vintage patina look, and of course, a stunning tone. The main problem with the old Firebirds is that the vintage cases were too shallow to properly accommodate the pitch inclination of the headstock. In fact, when the guitar is placed in its original case, the E-string tuner rests in direct contact with the case bottom. In this critical spot, the neck is easily broken if the case is accidentally dropped, which sadly happened to many vintage Firebirds. Let's see only a few iconic guitarists among those devoted to the original reverse Firebirds. Guitar legend Link Wray received from Gibson an early Firebird III in Polaris white custom finish. It seems that by 1965, in about 1 year of use, the headstock had been already repaired twice. In May 1965, the Rolling Stones guitarists Keith Richards and Brian Jones received, as part of an endorsement from Gibson, 2 matching Sunburst 7s, the top-of-the-line models. In those same days, the Stones recorded Satisfaction in Los Angeles, so it's plausible that these guitars were employed in that historic recording session. Years later, in the beautiful video of Like a Rolling Stone, Ron Wood sported a 60s 5th model, which is still among his favorite guitars. In 1968 and 1969, Eric Clapton, during his days with the Cream, used a 1963 Firebird First, the no-frills single pickup version. Clapton also initiated Stephen Stills into Firebirds. Rock icon and first-class performer P.J. Harvey looks outrageously cool with what seems to be an original vintage 7th. You can't mention the 7th without naming Phil Manzanera of the Roxy Music. Early in 1973, he was lucky to spot a local listing for a red Gibson guitar. The ad was from a teenager, son of a wealthy family, which had just moved to London from Kalamazoo. The red Gibson revealed to be an extremely cool and rare 1964 Firebird 7th in stunning original cardinal red custom color. It took only one look to decide. Manzanera gave the guy £150 and took the guitar without even plugging it in. This red Firebird became his signature guitar ever since. The official declaration of love arrived in 2008 when he dedicated a whole album to his Firebird. In my personal opinion, the most relevant and influential testimonial of the reverse Firebird V is Johnny Winter. The legendary guitar hero from Texas in the early 1970s found a very rare 1964 fifth in Polaris White in a 1963 Sunburst fifth, which he loved in particular and used extensively throughout his career. Each of the two guitars was replicated in a limited run of only 125 pieces by the Gibson Custom Shop. The Sunburst was made in 2008, the white one came out in 2021 and had a Murphy Lab finish. On all his Firebirds, Johnny had the original vibrola removed in favor of a regular stop tailpiece. Johnny declared that besides the captivating look, he loved the Firebird because it offers the best of all worlds, combining Gibson playability and Fender tone. In particular, Winter loved the extra bite of the mini humbuckers, which he even favored over the traditional full-sized PIFs. When I was in my teens, I was a huge Johnny Winter fan. I had the big poster in my bedroom with the cover of the album Captured Live. In 1991, I went to visit London with my current wife, and we could not find one single music shop. At one point, by pure chance, we went around the corner from Charing Cross Road onto Denmark Street and bumped into this impressive array of shop windows full of breathtaking guitars. In particular, I was attracted by a Polaris White Gibson Firebird Reverse 5th. At the time, it looked pretty exclusive. In fact, it was one of the earliest reissues introduced in those years. They had stop-bar tailpiece. It looked just like the Firebird in my Johnny Winter poster. I bought it, and it became my first Gibson guitar. I have always loved the reverse Gibson Firebird. It's one of the most iconic guitar models ever. Playing vintage originals from the 1960s has been a fantastic experience. In fact, the instruments I tried are lightweight, balanced, and boast great tone, not to mention the great look and the fascinating story. This probably explains why the original Firebirds rocketed in value in the last few years. Please let me know your judgment and thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe now and click the bell to keep posted. Join the Facebook group Bob Stone Review and follow my Instagram profile.